Excellent.
Okay.
Hey.
There we go.
Your whole life has led up to this moment. Excellent. So back in 2019, I was obsessing with one seemingly simple question, which is, why is our response to the climate crisis so weird?
So that was kind of the starting point. And of course, in 2019, this other world-changing story broke. It was COVID. And we had to put a pause on all the work that we were planning to do on our series on the climate. And as soon as we solved COVID and we vanquished it, we decided to turn back to climate for all the usual reasons, the reasons we all know. We say it's the biggest story on Earth. It's our generation and the generations beyond us are going to see the worst impacts of it. And this is why we decided, let's come back to this. Let's turn back to the planet and climate change.
And so that's what we've been working on for the past 2 years. And the real effort that we wanted to do with this series is, there are plenty of brilliant journalists out there explaining climate change, explaining the impacts and the scientific methodologies behind it all. But we wanted to take a different approach, and that was really the effort here. How can we cover climate in a different way? And so we obviously got a lot of learnings over the last 2 years, and we were really enthused to try and share that with other people who are interested in covering the climate.
Next slide.
Next slide.
So before we continue, just to introduce ourselves.
So I'm Ali Ray, and I'm a video journalist with Al Jazeera for the past coming up 10 years. So within this series, I present it, but also do the editing and filming as well.
Ali does virtually everything on this series. She's multi-skilled, and I'm the executive producer. I've worked with Al Jazeera for now nearly 18 years. So both of us are all-time Al Jazeera hands. And what we were really keen to do is show you this latest series of ours called All Hail the Planet. If you can go to the next slide. We have a 10-part series here. Half of it is already released. The other half is coming this year. But the learnings that we want to go through with you are things we've learned across the span of making these 10 episodes.
So just to give a brief overview of what the 5 are going to be before we delve into each one. The first one's intersectionality. Second one, calling out the BS, with Mina's lovely suggestion of the emoji there. The next one on the visuals and why they matter. Then we're looking at balance, and finally confronting our own ecotoxicity. So we're just going to delve into each of those and sort of explain our learnings.
So intersectional. Now, that term intersectional is quite academic, right? And I think many people, you've heard it, but for Ali and me, this is really very much a reflection of how we live as human beings, right? Our identities are intersectional. No one's just a woman. You're often a working class woman or an elite woman, or you're educated or less educated. All of these forces come into play, your geography, all of that has a bearing on how you navigate the world. So for us, it was very important that we have an intersectional approach to the climate, because not only is that a reflection of how we live, but also it helps make our journalism more explanatory and more accessible. So with regards to explaining, why is it that intersectional approaches help us explain things better? When you're not limiting yourself to just tracking an issue through one path, through one little prism or one narrow focus, you find that you're actually able to take out a more zoomed out view and connect the dots better. And no better story than the climate for us to be connecting the dots. The other thing is, when you cover a lot of ground when you look at climate change, you find that you're touching upon many people's realities. That's where the accessibility comes in. You're actually finding yourself becoming more relevant to a wider base of people. And that's the whole point, right? As journalists, we want to get our work out to a wider group of people.
And so it was very clear to us early on when, confronting this very seemingly basic question, why is our response, so weird, why hasn't more been done, is that we were confronting issues to do with power. And power never restricts itself to one sphere, and so that's why taking an intersectional approach, I think, is really important to sort of think about the structures that are actually at play here. And power also, once we started unpeeling these layers, we realized that power structures often reinforce themselves. And
it's like very layered, Power doesn't just operate in one sphere. It's all through, and it reinforces itself and it builds on each other.
And that's often why we feel so trapped in feeling like we can't do anything about it. So when we were formulating the issues that we were going to talk about with this series, we've covered everything from, militarism to natural disasters, although we obviously put quotes around the word natural there, carbon offsetting. We've got some really diverse topics there. So that was the point of doing this intersectional approach. So if I was to give an example of this, we did an episode on plastics, and we realised that a lot of the time the coverage focuses on waste and it turns it into a waste issue, whether it be focusing on, let's look at Indonesia and the amounts of waste that are in the ocean and focusing on that element. Instead, we wanted to look at the entire supply chain of plastic, from how it's made to how it's consumed and then how it's disposed of. And to take one instance of our episode, we have a section on an area in the US that some of you may be familiar with called Cancer Alley. And that's where a lot of petrochemical plants are, where a lot of plastic gets made. And there's a high concentration of petrochemical plants, but it's also got a historic connection with having a lot of plantations and slavery aspects as well. So there's a high population of often poor black communities. And so I want to show you a snippet from this episode. And in this, we've got Sharon Levine, who's a resident in this neighbourhood, who's actively been trying to push back against the development of a new petrochem factory in her community.
Sharon and others like her have put up a fight against the Formosa Plastics plant. In 2019, Sharon testified before Congress.
These new plants poison our communities and deepen the plastic crisis.
Then in November 2021, Sharon confronted Louisiana Governor John Bell Edwards on a video call.
I wanted to ask you if you would reconsider to stop the construction of Formosa Plastic from coming into St. James Parish.
Well, I always take a look at new data, and if there's new data to look at, I certainly will.
He didn't know what to say, so that just popped into his head. If you get more data, how much more data do you need? You need our blood. In my opinion, I feel like I don't care how much tests we do, they're going to still deny the fact that this industry that's causing us to be sick. That's my feeling. I hope I'm wrong.
When decisions are made about plastic, it's not a question of data. Is there a magic bullet piece of information that some research could prove? It's a question of power. Too often, both resources and entire communities are deemed as disposable.
So just that short snippet, you can see this example brings together that the issue with plastic isn't just one to do with supply and demand. It's not just about economics around whether it's the cheapest form of packaging. You've also got that the impact of plastic production ties in with racism, poverty, gender issues, and so only by sort of taking that intersectional approach you can unpack these layers of why more isn't being done to effectively confront the climate crisis.
We could go on about intersectional journalism, but we've decided.
Sorry.
Okay, so we could go on about intersectional journalism, but moving swiftly on to calling out the BS. Now, I think for many practicing working journalists here, I think the reality is very quickly you find there's a lot of BS, a lot of it. You're just wading through it most of the time. And in climate, specifically, in climate coverage, you find that it's such a rich kind of seam of crap that people just pour into your path as you're trying to understand what's happening here. You have governments, you have big corporations, you have institutions. I mean, in our reporting, we found that even the United Nations, which has so many institutions actually looking into climate change, they are part of some of the BS at times. So for us, it was really an opportunity to get beyond the claims, unpick them, and expose them for what they are. We were talking about misinformation. We're talking about gaslighting. When you talk about gaslighting, one of the examples we had is this notion of clean coal. And I don't know if people have heard of carbon neutral oil. That's something that Shell actually put out as an advertisement, carbon neutral oil. And when we're looking at this stuff, it's many times you find these things simply regurgitated. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, many of us are aware that this greenwashing and this gaslighting exists, but what I think was a big learning for us and our takeaway was how often it gets repeated by journalists themselves as well and not questioned. So the impact of that is that many times these terms are legitimized. And, there are many examples: net zero, carbon neutral, vagueness around things like eco-friendly, X, Y, Z. Without questioning, what does it mean to be net zero? Is it even possible? Should we be, promoting these terms?
Just to interrupt on that, so just to we have 10 minutes done or 10 minutes left? Jeez. We're on slide 2. I'm going to very quickly say this, but this whole point of legitimizing the BS, right? Just look at the amount of environment reporting you get that talks about net zero as a credible thing, like it can actually happen, when there is no pathway to it, right? So legitimizing that sort of terminology is something we didn't want to do.
Yeah, and I know we have to swiftly move along, but I think one important point just to make with this is that, when you get these terms like carbon offsetting, you will often find in a lot of people's reporting, they will end with this attitude of like, well, something's better than nothing. At least we're doing, at least Qantas is doing X, Y, Z. At least BP are trying to do something. And I think a big takeaway point for us, I'm going to let our speaker speak for themselves, was this idea of, well, is it better than nothing?
Buses are making us believe that something is being done when actually what is being done is worsening the problem. It's allowing the drivers to go and expand, to even claim that it's green, that it's sustainable. So instead of talking about fossil fuels, we are talking about CO2 models. And while doing so, it actually conceals all the violence and the abuse of power that the fossil fuel industry is built upon.
Yeah, so I think that's important to reflect on. Just, is it better than nothing, or is that sort of cloaking the real issues that need to be addressed? Then, gosh, it feels like
Buses are making us believe.
Speed presenting. So the next one is visuals matter, and for any video journalist, the first question you think of what is going to be the visuals for this episode. The 3 sort of aspects I wanted to focus on that we really tried to take a different approach within this series is our choice of animations, our style of pieces to camera, and then even just the selection of B-roll or the other footage that we include in the series.
Starting with animations. Everybody uses graphics. There's nothing new there, but we wanted to go beyond bar charts, animated numbers. We have a collaborator who works with us, so there's Ali, there's me, but an equally important part of our team is a guy called Pierangelo Pirac. It's weird. We are the 2 non-Italians, and he's not here. Very odd, but anyway. So Pierangelo actually really helps enhance the editorial. See, many times when you're talking about climate change, you'll find you're not going to get that damning piece of evidence. You're not going to get that damning piece of footage or that shot that just explains the story. This is where we need help with graphics that take it one step beyond. Ali and I had very carefully and lovingly selected an example. We do not have time to show you that. So we're going to move straight on because Ali's PTCs are something that we really, really think through. She puts herself in a lot of situations to get the PTC, so I think she should explain that actually.
Yeah, that's a loving graphic that I will move on.
We're just going to move straight on.
Yes. One thing I wanted to highlight is this isn't a huge production team, as Mina mentioned. One thing I wanted to highlight is I often use this Osmo camera, which for anyone interested may want to use it as well. So, self-shooting, YouTuber style. There's lots of advantages with this style without having like a camera person with you, a sound person means you're often mistaken for a YouTuber. The amount of disappointing people when they go, "Are you a famous YouTuber?" I'm like, no.
Just
but this style is something that to consider in your own reporting if you want to do that more independent style. And then we also do sometimes, you don't need big fancy equipment to try and make things visual. This one we did stop motion where
We're surrounded by stuff. Kitchen stuff, office stuff, useful stuff.
So quite a simple setup, but visually trying to engage people from the get-go and trying to consider consumerism in a new creative way. And finally, I just wanted to make a point about the B-roll choices because I know that will affect a lot of people when they're choosing the images to go with their story. What we often find is when you go to a Getty or a lot of these libraries, you often don't find people in the images. And so there was a real conscious effort that we wanted to show footage with people in it and make it relatable to people's everyday lives. Otherwise, you're, situating things in the Arctic, and people are like, yeah, I know climate change is happening, you're showing me all these Arctic pictures, but I live in a city, like, how is this actually impacting me? So I think reflecting on not just going for the easy visuals is a really important learning as well.
I'd like to talk about balance. Balance is something that all of us learn as journalists, like Journalism 101. Now, thankfully, we are no longer in this zone of, you have a newsroom and you have a climate denier and you have a climate activist and both of them are going at each other. That's not where we are now. That's great, good. But the narratives are much more sophisticated. We're actually fighting this notion of balance in very different ways. For example, you'll have the big corporations. They'll say, we're engaging with the issues, right? So we go to them, we ask them a question, say, yeah, we're engaging with it.
Yeah, and so we obviously go to the big organisation and ask for their rights of reply. But I think what we learned also through this experience, it'd be very easy just to take their rights of reply and show them as is. But a lot of the time there was a lot of PR speak in it, there was a lot of spin, there wasn't a lot of directly answering our questions. And I think calling that out and not just directly repeating these platforms is important because the aim is to be truthful. And sometimes taking that step further is necessary.
I mean, look, we are very privileged. We are doing episodes that are 25 minutes long. We have the ability to ask Chevron a question, get the PR speak from them, put it up on our screen and say, yes, this is what they say, but here's the reality. Of course, when you're doing a 2-minute live hit, that's not possible, so we understand the privilege we have. We have a full 25 minutes. The other reason why a lot of people go for balance, by the way, is newsrooms are terrified. You're afraid of getting, look, if you're an isolated journalist, you don't want your editor getting a letter from the PR person at Shell saying, oh, your guy did this, he doesn't even understand the science, blah, 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 and they kind of deluge you with material. That's actually, if you're lucky. If you're very unlucky, you could be taken to court. So many times newsrooms are saying, let's just give them a right of reply, let's have them on the air. And that's what we were trying to navigate out of. You see, what's happened is the big corporations have now become arbiters of our journalism. They will sit and gaslight you, and the minute you put out a bit of journalism, they'll say, oh, well, you don't even know what you're talking about. I know we're limited for time, but we're going to try and show you this example, this bite that came from one of our speakers.
As climate disinformation campaigns ramped up in the 1990s, oil companies and their PR firms propped up contrarian scientists to push narratives of uncertainty and shift how journalists cover the issue. Big oil became a key arbiter of whether coverage of their industry was journalistically sound. They would accuse those who didn't quote CEOs and spokespeople of bias. Their efforts resulted in a denial machine, a sprawling network of talking heads, front groups, and false research outfits built to persuade people that they have nothing to worry about.
One second. By the way, that was also an example of Pierangelo's work. Like, Pierangelo was the one who kind of took that idea of ours and made it come alive. We now go to the last point. Just to ask everybody, there's no session after this. Are you okay for us to go over by 5 minutes, if that's okay? Sorry. Yes? Okay. All right. So our last point. It was very important for Ali and me to locate ourselves in this thing. We're doing climate change. We have to be very aware of the organization giving us a platform. It's Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar. Qatar is incredibly rich because they're in the extractive industries. They work in fossil fuel. We understand that.
And then if you look at even the countries we're from, Australia is a massive exporter of coal and gas as well. Even my own state that's within Australia, Queensland, is opening up new coal mines.
I'm based in Britain. I am Indian. Both these countries have pretty complicated relationships with their own net zero and green promises. So at the outset, we realized that we are compromised in where we are located, where we're from. However, we both have a girl crush on Naomi Klein, and we took some kind of comfort from her words. I'm going to read it out because I won't be able to say it as well as eloquently as she said it. She said, if to be a part of the climate movement, you had to be completely separated from all fossil fuel structures, then there would be 3 people in that movement. The problem is, we're all implicated. This is our reality, right? So
I think acknowledging, there are certain things that we can't escape. We're all born into systems. But there are things that we can control. And so there was, we could have easily flown around the world and done this climate series where we're showcasing issues in all different parts. But we made a conscious decision from the beginning that this whole series is based in Australia and things mostly within my neighbourhood and city. The reason of that is not to sort of like centralise on myself, but it's to talk about these global issues and these global struggles and show how the connections that exist, so they're not operating in silos. And, there's also an element where obviously we're talking about the climate crisis, that flying around the world is obviously probably not the most responsible thing. The best approach. The best approach. So it's kind of like twofold. That on one level we're being conscious of that, and the other level is we're trying to go. Everyone should be able to take lessons from this series and reflect it to their own personal experience. And so that's where things like these intersectionality and looking at these sort of academic topics, which can sound really big to begin with. You can apply them to your own space. We did have examples again, but we only have 5 extra minutes. So just to kind of bring that home on the plastics episode, it's very easy. I think a lot of you would have heard about this issue, right? Big garbage mountains in places like Indonesia and stuff, which never get recycled. And very often you have people going there and saying, oh my God, look, it's not getting recycled. What Ali did was she said, let's just wheel back for a second. Where does it begin? So for plastics, the notion of intersectionality came in right from the beginning, where we never just looked at plastic as a waste. Look at it from the beginning of the toxicity of its very creation, through to how it's used, through to how it's disposed, then you get to the waste problem. And then you try to, hopefully for our audience, we give you like a life cycle and why plastics are so problematic, not just when you use them, that's why I'm not drinking it, not just when you use them, but also when you produce them. I think we should go to our closing slide, if we can. Sorry. Hold on. Apologies. That is my bedroom. We did a bunch of vox pops around the world as well. If anyone's interested in more about the series, please come talk to us. We love, discussing this. But finally, just to say, these 5 points that we've kind of distilled and kind of rammed through very quickly in this half hour, they inform a lot of the work that we do on the All Hail series. So when All Hail was created, the idea was to be able to give our audiences a comprehensive sense of the forces that are playing on all of us and influencing how we respond to the challenges we face. Prior to The Planet, we did Algorithm, which was the first one, and of course then the lockdown. We did 5, was it 5 or 4? 5. Yeah, 5. We did 5 episodes on our response to COVID. And again, intersectionality, trying to make sure that we're connecting the dots for our audiences, that was a big part of what we did. So I know a lot of that can seem like we're just promoting the stuff that we've been working on, but really I hope that it can spark some ideas. And yeah, if anyone would like to discuss them more, please come talk to us, because we're out of time. We're out of time. We do have 3 minutes. If there's anyone who wants to ask us any questions, we're happy, or we can just take it outside. Yes. Oh, the DJI Osmo. So there's Osmo, and for anyone who wants to use drones, something I found out the hard way is you can obviously get the bigger drones, but if you get the one that's under 250 grams, there's a lot less restrictions, so you can use them in city settings a lot more. Obviously, you get licensed to do the training, but it's a lot easier. So any of those tech questions, please come see if you're interested. We're opening a tech bar just outside. Yeah. Yes. Hi. Yeah, it usually takes probably a year. And that's with taking your time off, but also remembering that when I'm working on one episode, I can't be editing the other episode and all of that. The thing is, there are different ways of producing anything, right? I'm speaking as an executive producer here. You look at teams, how do you staff them, how do you resource them? This kind of program, maybe with a much bigger team and different resources, you could produce in about 5 months. The thing here is that, and I mean, Ali's very humble, so she won't say it. The thing is, she has multi-skills, and it's also a very particular perspective she brings. So what Al Jazeera has decided in this case is it's very rare for a program of this complexity to be built so much on the shoulders of one person, but we have found that the authenticity of the voice is then much clearer. So for 5 episodes, we take a year. And that's like, I think also like we don't have other people doing the pre-interviews. It's like literally calling, finding the interviewees yourself, doing those long interviews, doing the research and all that as well. Which
It's
is
all
such
of
a
it,
privilege to
end
be
to
able
end.
to do it. Yeah.
And I thought that must have taken at least a year.
Yeah.
Thank you. We feel less bad now.
Don't worry.
One last, or are we good?
I feel like we've just talked at you a lot. I
Thank
apologize.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys.